One. Um, Also, while you're here, before you go up front and see the display of items, military models put together by me. Um, They're really cool. And the other day I had some guy who was standing there goes, wow, these are really great looking toys. I said, hey, they're not toys. 200, 300 pieces each. Anyway, if you are interested in World War II, we do have quite a nice collection. You will find that in 940, 54, right over there. If you don't have a library card, I'm not going to embarrass you, but today is a really, really good day to go ahead and get that card so you can take out those World War II books. All right, it's time for thanks. All right, none of this would be possible without a really, really great crew on our staff, starting with our IT manager, Danny Hussey. Turn around. Graphic designer, Ariana McDaniel in the back. Our building manager, Derek Baker, in the back. All right. Okay, let's get started. All right, it's time. We are going to do a battle which a lot of people, like, they really forget about, mostly because of that date right there, June 4th. Put up your hand if you know what happened 2 days later. Okay, that's the biggest reason right there. And we are going to talk about military history, ordnance, and all of that. So we're going to start, and you're going to see a very dour-looking gentleman on the left there. You probably know who he is. Winston Churchill was recovering from a bout of pneumonia in Marrakesh in late 1943, and he was starting to put together a plan in his head how they would best be able to get at the Germans. And he said, Italy is probably a really good place because they kind of detected that Mussolini was almost on the way out. So he thought that maybe an amphibious operation to get around the Italian front that was pretty much bogged down in the center around Cassino. And Churchill, as you know, if you've studied him, he's a Navy guy. He thinks Navy, okay? That's what Britain is all about. Their army, kind of secondary, their navy was supreme. So he's thinking that, okay, we can use our advantage in the Mediterranean because they had naval power in the Mediterranean. The Germans, not so much. So they would prefer what was called a peripheral engagement. Let's get at the Germans there and see if we can just like wear them away, draw troops from other areas like mostly Russia, because Premier Stalin was getting very, very nervous, saying, where's my second front? Of course, they were working on that. So he thought that going through Italy, that would appease him. Again, if you know your history, Mussolini had been ousted, but on one of my programs, if you were around, that Hitler sent some guys down to the Gran Sasso. They rescued Mussolini from a mountaintop and set him up in northern Italy with sort of like a puppet government. So Churchill's saying, let's do this. Let's put together a plan to do an amphibious end run. However, he said, yeah, Italy is the soft underbelly of Europe. It's not going to be a problem. However, General Mark Clark later said, after many, many months and years of fighting, that it was more like a tough old gut. All right, we're going to take a look at this. Of course, if you know the geography of Italy, it has the Apennine Mountains go down the center, and it kind of divides the country east and west. The Allies invaded in September 43 with the British landing at Taranto. But where is my low-tech pointer? Here we go. They landed across the Straits of Messina, right here, and Taranto, right there. The Fifth Army landed at Salerno. The Gustav Line, which is right there, the Germans were gradually retreating up the Bud. The line ran just a little bit south of Cassino, all the way up there to Ortona. Churchill felt that an amphibious landing behind this line would cause the German line to collapse, they go rushing up to reinforce. Where were they going to land? They selected the resort town of Anzio, also a fishing village. It also had the distinction of having Nero and Caligula were born there. It would become a slaughter pen for the next 4.5 months. Okay, here's a couple. We're going to run through some people first, so please, bear with me. General Eisenhower, he was being recalled back to England because, of course, he was going to be the supreme commander of Operation Overlord, which was going to be the invasion of Normandy. But before he left, he told General Alexander, who was in charge of the 15th Army Group, they knew they were planning something like this. He says, beware the Germans. They're not going to react the way you think they're going to react, because Eisenhower had had plenty of experience with this. Churchill wanted to send, at first, Churchill only wanted to send in one division, one. But then gradually he said, oh, we don't want the Americans just going in by themselves. So we'll add one British division. In the end, they would have 7 divisions at Anzio. George Patton, of course, if you know his story, he got into a little trouble in Sicily. So they're sending him back to kind of be in charge of kind of like a shadow army to fool the Germans, because they all thought that Patton was going to lead the cross-channel invasion. Of course, Patton will lead the Third Army after D-Day. General Mark Clark, rather controversial figure. He's known for leading the Fifth Army and the capture of Rome on June 4th, 1944. Clark landed at Salerno, as I said. Again, they weren't really sure what they were going to encounter. As it did happen, there were extreme amounts of German troops at Salerno. They nearly got thrown off back into the sea. Okay, the plan was to land at Anzio while the Fifth Army was going to attack up through Cassino. Of course, they were hoping that the line was going to collapse. They would come all the way up. Anzio would go into the Alban Hills, and they would link up and go on to Rome. They decided they were going to call the invasion Operation Shingle. Why that? Well, they decided that the plan was that they were going to land at Anzio and hang on to that piece of ground as long as they could. And that was basically a shingle, because you had marshes on one side, you had woods forests on the other, and there's just a very narrow place for them to land. A little bit of chronology. The invasion plan was presented to General Alexander. In December, Clark suggested the 2 divisions, which we talked about. And in December, Shingle was canceled because the Cassino front down here wasn't going anywhere. If you know the story, they were pounding on that line. But the Germans were very, very tough there. They had some very veteran paratroop regiments, which we will also run into later. But Churchill, dang it, he was going to have his way. He says, you guys are going to go in. I know I'm right. We can go all the way to Rome. We talked about General Alexander very briefly. That's him in the flying jacket. He was in charge of the 15th Army Group. Here he's talking to a couple of American and British generals. He was, and you have to remember this because we're going to get to this, he was General Clark's superior. And General Lucas, who would actually lead the invasion of Anzio, he and General Penny, the British general, were under Clark. Okay, the things are going to start to gel here. The biggest problem with this plan was there were not enough invasion craft. What was happening? The Allies were starting to gather all of the LSTs, all of the LCTs back in England for Operation Overlord. So they started moving all of these back to England in preparation for that. Churchill goes, no, 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 wait, wait, wait. You can't do that because we won't be able to take over and do my plan. So Roosevelt caved. He said, okay, you can keep so many of these. And in the end, again, it would not be enough. Much hinged on those landing craft. The two people involved, General Lucas. Now, here's the thing, because I was listening to a podcast the other day about this. A lot of how you judge this battle depends on whether you are British or whether you are American, how you judge these different people that we're going to talk about. General John P. Lucas, this is a little bit sort of like the Peter Principle, which we talked about, where you can perform very good on one level, but then if they move you up to another level, you can't handle it, and it doesn't work very well. Well, they put General John P. Lucas in charge of the 6th Corps. He was going to lead the attack. He was one of the ones who really never, ever, ever felt good about this operation. And his quote was, will end up putting me ashore with inadequate forces and get me into a serious jam, which indeed happened. Then who will get the plane? Then the operation has a strong odor of Gallipoli. Now, what did he mean by that? That was Winston Churchill's plan during the First World War, which ended in disaster. But they didn't know yet that this was going to end in disaster as well. And he said the same amateur is still on the bench. George Patton, here played by George C. Scott, as he was leaving to go back to England, he was talking to General Lucas, and then he turns to one of his aides and he said, look, if the old man gets in trouble, shoot him in the ass so he can go home. Lieutenant Truscott, he's in charge of the 3rd Division. That is the American division that will land. The British is the 1st Division that will land. Again, he pointed out to General Clark, he said, you really got to cancel this because it's going to end in disaster. The whole plan depended on them breaking through at the casino front. If that didn't happen, guess who gets stranded up on Anzio? General Penny, the problems with an Allied operation. Major General Ronald Penny's 1st Division arrived in Italy to reinforce Montgomery's 8th, who was over there again on the East Coast. He didn't like the whole idea of being under the command of General Lucas. By early February, Penny's division will have taken such severe losses. He's asked for reinforcements, and Lucas says, well, you just have to deal with what you have. And then they started saying some very nasty things about General Lucas. They called him Corncob Charlie. He was a little older gentleman, older, 55 years old. And they didn't have any confidence in him because they figured they wanted them to be aggressive, but he was going to just consolidate the beachhead. Here's a very colorful guy, William Darby. He was killed on April 30th, 1945. Yeah, they were still in Italy then, in northern Italy, you know, the soft underbelly. He was the founding commander of the 1st Ranger Battalion, which was involved in the United States Army Rangers. He took part in the Allied invasion of the mainland. And we're going to get to this story in a little bit. The 6,615th Ranger Battalions, they're going to get wiped out in this battle. And I'll talk to you more about it later. Where's Dr. Stevens? Put your hand up. Smiling Albert. Those of you who follow this series know we have kind of like a running joke about General Kesselring, Smiling Albert. And I never before now put a picture of him smiling. They said, what are you talking about? Well, there he is. Because he had a very, very humorous personality. There he is smiling in a German reconnaissance plane. But don't let that fool you. This is a very brilliant, brilliant tactician and a master of strategy. While they were in Italy, Rommel was in charge of the 14th Army in northern Italy. He and Kesselring were constantly butting heads. Kesselring was quite relieved when Rommel was recalled to France to build the West Wall, waiting for the Allied invasion. Look at that guy on the left. Jeez. He looks like he just had some, food poisoning or something. General von Mackensen, again, don't be fooled. Fabulous tactician and strategist. He served in Poland, he served in France, he served in Russia. He was in charge of the German 14th Army in the north. They would end up being called down to Anzio, and he would be mixing it up with everybody at Anzio for the next several months. General Vietinghoff, we're not going to talk too much about him. He was in charge of the 10th Army down there at Cassino. Okay, there's a picture of some troops and equipment being landed there. On January 21st, Task Force 81 departs outside of Naples. They're going to start going up the coast towards Anzio. O-200, the British rocket boats move in just offshore of Anzio. There's a picture of them, and they just start pummeling the beach and the whole area. Much to their surprise, they go in and there's no Germans there. There were some. And the soldiers, they barely got their feet wet. And one American jeep that got in and drove through the woods, drove all the way to the outskirts of Rome. Where's the Germans? 0500, Kesselring's phone rings and says, hey, they're landing at Anzio. He jumps right into action. He had a number of different plans. Case Richard was one. There were different cases pre-planned that if there was going to be an invasion in Anzio, these are the troops that are going to go there. He instantly starts sending them down. The Americans, of course, they did some aerial missions, bombardments, trying to cut the rail lines, trying to cut the roadways to Anzio, but they didn't get it all. I would be remiss if we didn't include the Navy, because the Navy played a very, very big role in this battle. Admiral Lowry of the United States Navy and Admiral Tugridge of the Royal Navy, they, again, one of the big problems was, and the reason why they wanted to call off the whole thing was there wasn't enough time to rehearse. They had one rehearsal for this invasion. The landing boats got lost. They landed 10, 15 miles away from where they were supposed to land. The men, they didn't know their assignments, and they ended up actually having casualties from a rehearsal. And it was botched, and it should have been an omen for what was coming. But this is an excellent example of a combined arms operation. The Navy came in. Again, this is going to be a big factor because the Navy is going to support the Anzio bridgehead all the time. Okay, a Sherman tank of the 46th Royal Tank Regiment drives ashore from a landing craft. The Anzio battlefield was ill-suited for armor warfare. And the reason for that is it had such a high water table. And of course, any of you know about armor and armor tactics. Tanks do very well on dry, flat surfaces. They don't do too well in mud. And there was mud all the time. Again, remember, this is January 1944. It was cold, it was wet, it was raining all the time. The Shermans disembarking from a landing ship tank at Anzio. Note the extra lengths of track. Why are those there? Well, they use that for extra protection. Although the front of the tank is has good armor, they always wanted to have a little extra protection there. And this is a good picture because you can see the commander sitting in the top of the turret. You can see the driver and the gunner. The Sherman was unaffectionately called the Ronson. Now, what's a Ronson? Those of you who know a little bit, yes, because the Sherman was very easily ignited until they found a good way to stow the ammunition a little bit better. Danny was around somewhere. This is what he was showing me something earlier. The German wonder weapons at Anzio. Just a few days after the landing, these are Henkel 117s attacking the Allied fleet. And what they were doing, they were launching Henschel 293 radio-controlled bombs. A guy would sit in the front there, and long before Atari came along, they had a joystick that they would guide the anti-ship bomb towards the target. The problem is they had to do this mostly at night, and the Henschel was going like this, and there were spatial problems. What I mean is the guy couldn't really see very well between the bomber and the ship. And it ended up not being very good, although they had good success at Salerno, not as good success at Anzio, because the Allies found a way to actually jam their signal. This was the advent of electronic warfare, but also the advent of biological warfare. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, before the war at Anzio, Mussolini drained all the swamp areas around there, and they built this beautiful city. Most of them were most of the buildings were painted bright blue or bright red, and mosquitoes weren't a problem. What did the Germans do? After the Italians surrendered, they came in, and all of these areas along the coast, the Pontine Marshes, which is this, they flooded them again. So guess what happens? The mosquitoes come back, and there were actually quite a few casualties from malaria. Okay, these are some pictures of the landing ships. The stores are unloaded from the LSTs. And what they learned pretty quickly down in Naples and other areas, when they were loading the ships, they actually loaded the trucks first with everything, drove the trucks onto the landing ships, and then just drove them off when they would get to Anzio. And each day, 6 LSTs, they bring 1,500 tons of fuel, ammunition, and rations. Okay, here is, we're going to start getting into the nitty gritty here. The January 22nd landing, the British 1st Division right here is going to come in. And again, as I said, they just drove right in, and the Patagonia Woods right there. This is where they captured a couple of very stunned Germans, well, not a couple, but maybe about 50 or 60, who were just camping out in the woods there. They were, believe me, they were pretty surprised when they heard all this noise coming from down here. And they ended up being captured. The Americans landing down here, just south and near Nettuno. This line right here, this is as far as they got on the first day. And then the next days, the line gets a little bigger. And then we'll talk about all of this up here, the town of Aprile, Cisterna, and Capoleone. Here's a picture of a British soldier guarding some German troops. They were captured in those woods. They didn't know what happened, so they got scooped up pretty quick. There was almost no resistance at first, because this was the time in those first few days after the landing that Kesselring is pumping all of these reinforcements down towards the beachhead. The Germans, they have in military circles what's known as interior lines. They can move around behind the area behind the beachhead. They could bring in troops very, very quickly. The troops of the U.S. 3rd Division come ashore at Beach X-Ray on January 22nd. You can see that the Luftwaffe was already running missions. They were bombing some of the ships. Again, they achieved complete surprise because the Allies had also faked a couple of mock landings at different places along the coast. Okay, here is February 1st. Again, what Lucas has done, he's consolidating the beachhead. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit, I don't know where it is in the slides, but the graduation of expectations going down from Churchill. Churchill wanted these guys to go in and boom, go all the way up to Rome. Right away, get up there, take the city. And then the next level down, Alexander said, land at Anzio and then drive inland a little bit, cut the Appian Way, Highway 7, cut the Appian Way, but they didn't say anything else. Then we get down to Clark. Clark says, get on the beach, and if you can, go into the Alban Hills, which are up here. If you can, he says. And then we get down to Lucas. And Lucas said, I think I'm just going to stay on the beachhead and consolidate my forces because I know the Germans are coming. They're going to come. But this is what the lines look like on February 1st. These are the Americans here pushing almost all the way up to Cisterna, Campiglione, the British. Look how far up they push. When the Germans react to this, it's going to be known as the Battle of the Thumb. Why? Because it looks like a thumb. This is the 179th Regiment of the 45th Division, which was landed a few days, about a week or so later. As you can see, they're starting to pump more and more men in there. In the village of Aprila, it was also known as the factory because there was one set of buildings right in the center of the town with some very large chimneys, and they thought it looked like a factory. Now, there's a lot going on in this picture, and again, it's a little bit dark. But those of you who are weapons aficionados, there are several different things that you can see here. Of course, the ubiquitous M1 Garand. This guy over here has a M1 carbine. This guy has a Browning automatic rifle. These guys over here have a 30 caliber machine gun. They were able to hold the southeast corner of the town for several hours. But again, the Germans came and pushed them out. And this is how it's going to be for the whole month of February. Pushback, back and forth, back and forth. The town would exchange hands several times. Here's a good picture. The Germans launched 3 different attacks during the month of February. Now, what we see here, we see a Panther tank, but we also see kind of a funny vehicle, a B-4 remote control demolition vehicle. And they are going to, he's in there, they're going to drive it up to a certain point, and just like the guided bomb that we talked about, he's going to get out and go back with his controller, drive it up, and this device is going to drop the explosive charge. It turns around, goes back, he pushes a button, boom. Again, it didn't have very good success. Because a lot of them got bogged down in the mud. We talked about the Battle of the Thumb, and there you can see it right up there, almost to Capiglione, Aprila, the factory, Cisterna. Those are the 2 immediate objectives. And then, of course, Highway 7, also known as the Appian Way. The British 1st Division pushes all the way up to their creating the salient. The American Rangers met disaster outside Cisterna. And this is where we're going to go back to Darby and his Rangers. They had 3 battalions. They were going, of course, if you know anything about the Rangers, extremely well-trained soldiers in missions like this. They were going to go in and occupy Cisterna. The problem is, by this time of the war, a lot of those Rangers are not as well trained as the original group. And they didn't really know a lot about, doing different things to be quiet, be stealthy as they're approaching a target. And there was a deserter in a town, there's an Italian from one of the little towns that heard that this mission was actually going to happen, who alerted the Germans. And the Rangers, they're going down through the Mussolini Canal, and they're sort of like going down into different swales, moving up there. They didn't know what was happening. The Germans set a trap for them. And the 780 members of the Ranger battalions, all but 6 were killed or captured. By this time, Winston was expecting Rome to be already taken. And he's saying, I thought we were going to throw a wildcat on the beach. Instead, all we have is a beached whale. So he's getting very impatient at this point. Here's a good picture here. There's members of the Hermann Goering Division, a very elite division that was in Italy. They're passing by a Ferdinand tank destroyer. The Ferdinand made its debut in Russia, and for some reason, they forgot to put a machine gun on the front. So a lot of these suffered extreme losses. And you can see these guys right here, this got the two-man machine gun team. He's carrying an MG-42, and he's carrying all the belts of the with the ammunition. I put this guy in here because, yeah, he's a paratrooper, Fallschirmjäger. But the look on his face very aptly goes with the quote underneath that an American GI said. He said, Anzio was the place where many of us ceased to be young. And this guy looks pretty young right there. The battle campaign is going to run, of course, from January 22nd all the way to June 4th. In the beginning, the Allies successfully landed 36,000 men, 2,300 vehicles. They did all this within a day. And in June, of course, you see 150,000 soldiers. The Germans had 20,000 men, not at Anzio directly, but in the area. And of course, the Italian Social Republic, which is what the new fascist government was called, they had a few men. And in June, 135,000 German soldiers were there with a couple of Italian battalions. This is a really great story right here. Those of you who have heard a little bit about Anzio Annie. Anzio Annie was a 280 millimeter rail gun, of which I built one of those, not the full size one, but up in the display. It had a nearly 600-pound shell. Of course, this isn't something they just run in there. They have to put it on a trolley and load it that way. A 600-pound cartridge, if you can think for a moment, if you have a side-by-side refrigerator with two doors, two of those together is the size and weight of one of those shells for that gun. And just to give you a little bit idea of the range, if we were to take this gun and like put it all the way out in East Lehigh, you all know where East Lehigh is, right? It's about 35 miles away. They could shoot a shell all the way up there and hit targets on Sanibel. And some of the soldiers, they said it sounded like a freight train flying over. When it would hit, a few of the shells hit the water, it would raise a geyser 200 feet in the air. There were exactly two guns. The one that was captured at Civitavecchia, I think I said that right. One was called Robert, the other was Leopold. Robert ended up being destroyed. Leopold ended up at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. They brought the whole thing over there. And this is a picture of some of the shells. They use two different types. If you've never been to the Aberdeen Proving Ground, you really have to go and see that. All kinds of really great armor and all kinds of ordnance there. It's really fabulous. Okay, this is an M4 Sherman with a missing turret. Now on February 8th, there's an attack down the Via Anziata. Now you remember where we showed you the picture where Aprilia, the thumb, the road that goes all the way down to the beachhead is the Via Anziata. They would fight over this again. The Germans would come down. They would try to sever the thumb right at the base. They almost succeeded. On February 16th, Operation Fischfang, which is just basically fishing, attacks down that same road, knifes into the Allies, nearly splits them in two. The attack slows to a halt and is over on February 19th. Now, here's the other thing I was telling you about. This little gadget here is called the Goliath. It's a gasoline powered, just basically like a small tank without a turret, but it's full of explosives. But the difference with this is that these guys that have the controller would send that right up to the front of the target or whatever, and they blow it like right there. And there's a picture of some Tommies there with a couple of these. My dad actually saw one of these. Somebody brought it back over to his Navy base where he was in England. He had a picture of it. Unfortunately, I don't have that anymore. And it had a 2,000-foot cable, and they would drive it, like I say, right up to a target and explode it there. Betty, you're here, right? There's Betty Anhold in the back. This is a picture of Theodore Fraser, Betty Anholt's dad, if you know her, sitting in the back. He was with Battery A of the 106th Anti-Aircraft Battalion in Anzio. His diary entry for March 6, 1944, when he arrived there, was arrived at Anzio, Natuna. This is hell. If you're wondering about some of this, this is Betty's dad here, that's Betty's dad here. And look at this right here. Isn't that cool? If you think you know what that is, put your hand up. No, you don't. There's no way you could. All of these are cigarette wrappers that Betty's dad folded all together and put them together, and there's Betty's mom right in the middle. This is pretty cool, Betty. All right. Okay, back to the battle. General Alexander, he ordered Clark to relieve Lucas because Lucas basically, although he was trying, they felt he wasn't doing enough. But it looked like the strategy of his digging in and letting the Germans come to him was actually working. But they got all impatient with him. They sacked him and made Truscott the commander of the corps. After the German attacks in February, Kesselring ordered Mackensen to go on the defensive because by this time they are all so worn down. Like I say, by the end of February, March, there is 7 American divisions. There is about 8 German divisions, and they're just slugging it out back and forth. Here's a propaganda leaflet that was dropped over the beachhead by the Germans. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it basically says, "Ha, this is a death's head. Look what's waiting for you if any of you guys show up here in Anzio or Natuna. The same thing's going to happen to you." Another very famous one that I did not put on here, it showed a picture of an American GI tying his tie, and there's somebody's wife over there on the bed. There's a picture of some American POWs. Again, on both sides, a very, very large number of prisoners were taken. And the guy over there is a German parachutist. And this lady right here, Mildred Galars, also known as Axis Sally, she would entertain the troops on Radio Berlin. And referencing Anzio, she said, "Anzio is the largest prisoner of war camp in the world." Basically, what she meant by was they're contained. They can't move. They're not going anywhere. Okay, this is a German counterattack on February 16th and 20th. As I told you, they start pouring down here. This is the Via Anziata that goes all the way down to the beachhead. They started, as you see how much progress they made down all the way to here, attacking the British troops, some of the American troops there. And there's a curious little road here that the Allies called the bowling alley. And the reason why they called that the bowling alley is that the Germans were marching in true German fashion down this road, and the Allied artillery and the naval guns were just showering this. And one of the GIs said, "We're knocking them over like 10 pins." Here's an American soldier looking over a Marder 3, I think it is a tank destroyer. It has a Czech chassis and a 75mm gun. The final German attack, Operation Seitensprung, which means escapade, why, begins on February the 29th. By this time, the Germans are so weak that they don't make any progress whatsoever. The key to the Allied victory here, if you can call it that, is the combination of naval guns and artillery. By the time the battle was almost done, the Americans, British had almost 400 cannons in the beachhead in that area. You've heard of Audie Murphy. He was there. Again, he had malaria down in Naples. He came up to Anzio on the 29th, and he participated in that first battle of Cisterna. He was made a platoon sergeant in Company B. Taking shelter from the weather in an abandoned farmhouse, Murphy and his platoon killed the crew of a passing German tank. They just jumped on this tank and started hosing it, grenades down through the turret. He would receive a Bronze Star. The other guy who showed up there briefly, and here's where there's a little bit of irony involved with this. The other guy that showed up briefly was Ernie Pyle. I'm sure you've heard of him, famous correspondent. He's pictured here. Also over here eating some rations, and one of his quotes was, "You stay in one place too long and your luck runs out." Well, his luck did not run out at Anzio, but it did at Okinawa in April of 45, where he was killed. Here is another German weapon called a Nebelwerfer, or rocket launcher. It came in various sizes. The most preferred one was the 21 centimeter, 210 millimeters. And I find this picture to be kind of funny because you see this guy holding this like here. That shell is 250 pounds. I'm sorry. One guy cannot hold a 250-pound shell. Even two guys might be a little bit of a stretch. So here's an actual picture of them putting the Nebelwerfer in place. The reason why it was so versatile was they were able to fire off a volley and then move it like this before any kind of counterfire could take it out. Here's some British prisoners carrying a wounded soldier near Nettuno. Some unfortunate things that happened in this hospital row area. There was artillery flying back and forth all the time. Unfortunately, several of the hospital tents were hit. A lot of the wounded that were being treated by medics were killed. There were several doctors that were killed as well. We talked a little bit about some of the different things. There's a lot of different casualties, not just from battle, but also from trench foot. And what is trench foot? It is when your feet are always wet. And you remember what I said about there being such a high water table at Anzio? They would dig their foxholes, and before very long, they fill with water. So these guys' feet were constantly wet. Again, January, February, it's cold, snowy, and this poster right here tells you how to take care of your feet. They also had what was known as the Anzio stoop, not to be confused with the Sanibel stoop. The Anzio stoop that they developed was the foxholes, the trench lines were not that deep, so they were stooped over like this to go from one place to another. Otherwise, they would be hit. The Italians, they were involved. These were the Italians that remained loyal to Mussolini after he was deposed. And they did serve at Anzio. They did take quite a few casualties. Here's a couple interesting things, some odds and ends. During Operation Shingle, to fool the Germans, they had these inflatable tanks. These are also inflatable tanks they used up in northern Scotland under George Patton's Shadow Army to make the Germans think that they were building up this huge armored force, when in reality they were just these basically rubber balloons. The problem that the beachhead always had was that the Germans had the high ground. They had the high ground in the Alban Hills, which the Allies were supposed to go and take, like on D plus 3, 4, or 5. The Germans stayed up there on those hills. They could see the whole beachhead. They could call artillery fire down on any point on that beachhead. And Mackinson was up here with his telescope, and he could see movement on the beach from about 10 miles away. You heard a little bit in the news lately about the use of cluster bombs, which are technically illegal. Well, the Germans used those. And if you know what a cluster bomb is, it opens like this and shrapnel goes flying everywhere. extreme anti-personnel weapon. A little bit of talk about some of the different tanks that were there. Of course, the Sherman. We've got to move along a little bit. Of course, the 75 millimeter gun. It was the mainstay of the American Army, not only in Italy, but also in France later. Here's a bunch of German POWs being escorted to the rear. The German 14th Army at Anzio were comprised of a lot of regiments and battalions who were basically resting because they were taken out of the casino front and to go up there to sort of rest and relax. A lot of the units that half destroyed, mostly destroyed, they would start putting them together. They had quite a few casualties. Here's the M10 motor gun carriage. This is a kind of a strange thing. This is a tank that never really had a nickname. They wanted to call it the Wolverine, but it never caught on. This turret, this is an open turret actually. So you've got a couple of 50 caliber machine guns. They used those at Anzio. Here is the Panther. Well, we talked a little bit about the Panther, but the problem with the Panther, as you'll see in another picture that we have there, it was still basically being introduced. This was like the first generation of this tank that would go on to be probably one of the best tanks of the war. It had a tendency of the engine overheating, and the placement of the ammunition was not so great. Here's some pictures of the Green Howards, the British regiment. They occupied some captured German communications trench, and you see them looking very serious up here, but here's a jolly guy up here mugging for the camera. Here's the 7th Battalion, the Cheshire Regiment. Again, this is what we really didn't touch on too much, but there they are in the trenches, and a lot of, because they were stuck there for weeks and months, it started really to resemble a World War I battlefield because they had mud, lice, again, trench foot. And here's the biggest problem that overshadows everything. Here's a Sherman stuck on its side because of the mud. Oh, geez. I'm calling my wife right after today. She just can't keep doing this to me. Okay, here's your pop quiz. I forgot to tell you there's a pop quiz. Don't anybody speak, please. No speaking. Okay. Here's our pop quiz. The Allies gave this weapon a nickname. Was it the Kopfknocker, the Schlagkrafter, the potato masher, the Nussknacker, or the Doppelganger? Put your hand up. Three. Yes. I only have like 1 or 2 books. You all got this like all at once. So I'm just going to have to throw one book out there. Yep, there it is. The steel hand grenade or stick hand grenade was known to the Allies as the potato masher. Now, this is one of the most famous pictures of World War II right here. It shows this guy. He's in action right there. This guy, he looks kind of serious. And I wonder about this if it was not a posed picture, because it's a stick hand grenade. And you see how that guy's holding it like this. I've seen pictures of them doing it. They throw it like that, end over end, across at your enemy. And he's holding it sort of like this. Now, it may be real, I don't know. Okay, here's a good picture right here. Mark 6 Tiger. Yeah, the Tiger tank was there. And Mark 4 Panzer. The soldier on the right looks like he's trying to fix the tread, and some small trees there serving as the camouflage. The Mark 4 Panzer on the left, it's got road wheels on the back because, as we have learned many times over, the back of the tank is the most vulnerable, and that's where they wanted to hit it if you could. Here is the Panther. This is the one that I wanted to show you. This is the reason why tanks, it doesn't matter whether it's the Panther, the Sherman, or whatever, they're not suited to perform very well in mud. And you can see that all the mud over there, it clogs those interleaved wheels, and they would have to stop periodically and clean all of that mud out of there. Again, the Panther also had problems with overheating. Now, oh, I lost my pointer. Barely visible over here, you can hardly see it, ended up being the preferred mode of transportation at Anzio. Donkeys, wagons. Why? Because they didn't bog down in mud that much. All right, there is our Mark IV Panzer, which we saw, 75 millimeter gun, medium tank. It ended up being the workhorse of the German army. Here's some Anzio trivia. You're going to like this. I'll bet you never knew about this. The battle sled. What they did, they would take barrels, cut them in half, put them together, and each one of these is a soldier laying down prone in the battle sled. And of course, then the priest, the Mark VII priest that's there, would hook onto there and drag all of those guys towards the battle. And they say that it was okay because it would avoid mines. The tank would absorb the mines. So it was pretty interesting, unique field modification, I think you would call that. Okay, we come down to the end of May. Again, the Germans are starting to lose everywhere. And the casino front, and I forget who I was talking to, they ended up bombing the Monte Cassino, the abbey that was on the top of the hill. Why did they do that? Because they said the Germans were in there. They were using it as an observation post. They weren't. But once they bombed the hell out of that monastery, then the Germans moved in, and then they did use it. But by then, Operation Diadem, that was the big push. That Fifth Army in the Brits, they're going to push up there. Finally, there's going to be a breakout at Anzio. And then we come to, yes, this map here. This shows the breakout where they start moving up here towards Belmonton and Highway 7. And I've got a little ahead of myself there, but here's a picture of some captured German medics helping a wounded soldier. We talked about some of the reasons why there were so many non-battle casualties. And again, we talked about trench foot, but also malaria. Hate to say it, dysentery, chronic diarrhea, all kinds of stuff that could put a soldier low. And here is the race for Rome. And we're about to enter the territory of extreme controversy. Alexander instructed Mark Clark to, again, make his breakthrough, link up with the Anzio beachhead. The Anzio guys were supposed to go inland and cut off the retreating Germans of the 10th Army. Clark said, no, Truscott, yeah, we're not going to do that. You're going to push inland, but then you're going to take a sharp left, go up Highway 6 and 7 and capture Rome. What happens is Truscott ends up going straight into the teeth of some of the most prepared German defenses. When the Germans were retreating from Anzio, they formed a new line just a little bit south of Rome. Now, what the Allies didn't know, and in a very rare turnabout, Hitler said Rome is now an open city. And what that means is we're not going to fight for Rome. We're going to move up north, far, far away from Rome, consolidate our sources. For Hitler, that was very rare because he always used to say, you're going to fight to the last man. But this was different. Here's Clark talking with some soldiers after they did link up with the guys coming up out of Anzio. They could have possibly won the battle by just containing the beachhead. And this is where we're going to talk a little bit about if you're a fan of Lucas and have read the literature, you're going to say, yeah, Lucas did what was right. He stayed right there, let the Germans come to him. History, unfortunately, judges him a lot more harshly. Now, at the bottom line, the Anzio campaign, it was a flawed plan. Why? Because they didn't have enough men. They didn't have enough equipment. Churchill and Clark, they were blinded by the Eternal City. Is that Paris or Rome? Yeah, okay. They were blinded by to be the first ones into Rome. Hey, it was an Axis capital. Very prestigious if you could do that. I'm sorry, Churchill, of course, he was very upset because they wanted a British army to go in. And here's the thing. This is all boiled down to this. Muddled objectives. You remember how I talked about going down the chain of command. Muddled objectives and failure. But if you really, really look at it, in the end, it was not a failure because they did take Rome. And here's the cost and the lessons that were learned. The whole campaign, the Allies lost 43,000 men slogging back and forth with the Germans. The Axis lost 40,000. And here's our lessons that we can learn. The Anzio campaign was good and bad at the same time. Well, why? It was bad because of the reasons why I listed. It was good because they eventually did take Rome, but they stayed in Italy. Again, the Germans moved further north. They moved north of Rome. They moved further north into the Po River area. And again, like I said, they will be there until April 1945 when the Germans surrendered. And we talked about General Lucas's strategy of entrenchment. What's the correct one? That's up to you to decide. Was Clark correct to order Truscott to move on Rome? Now I'm going to take issue with that because the Germans of the 10th Army that were broken at Cassino, they're fleeing north, and Clark said, no, we're not going to deal with them. We're going to go straight northwest into Rome. Alexander, and the others, they were extremely upset because that allowed the Germans to escape up through the center of Italy and form their new line north of Rome. Anzio was eventually won by the Allied superiority. What did we talk about? Artillery, navy, and air power, which the Germans were sorely lacking in all three of those areas. Unfortunately, the victory of Anzio was overshadowed. They rolled into Rome on June the 4th, 1944. Clark, hey, hooray for me, I took Rome. It was all in the newspapers for exactly 2 days.
What's the distance from where Lucas was to Rome?
The Anzio beachhead was approximately 30 miles southeast of Rome. Okay, here's some of my sources that we used. I'll tell you, if you've never read anything by Rick Atkinson, you've got to read his trilogy. This guy is an incredible historian. The way he writes is, let's see, The Day of Battle, The Guns at Last Light, which we will use a little bit when we talk about the Battle of the Bulge. He gets down to the actual history of the area, the battles. He went into great length about the Roman emperors during the battles of the Anzio. He talks about the flowers, the air, the smells, the people. That's a true historian. Alex Kershaw, very good. This is where we got the history of a little bit about Audie Murphy and Ernie Pyle. Anzio 44, that is an Osprey publication, very good, but is very heavily weighted on the British side. Anzio by Lloyd Clark, a good, very balanced history. And if you are very, very interested in naval affairs, of course, Samuel Eliot Morison is the god of naval history. He wrote something like 15 or 20 books on different naval aspects of World War II. So this is where we're going to finish for today, exactly 11 o'clock. How about that? And if you want to go up and see Ariana's book discussion by our author that's actually going to be here next Wednesday, Marie Benedict. So if you have a few minutes, go up there, be with her. Oh, I forgot, I'm not looking at a camera anymore. Would you like to answer any? No, you can answer the question. Go ahead, ask. Ask away.
Was there any curve?
I'm sorry?
Did the US have aircraft carriers for air support?
No,
Mention it, so I assume not.
no. The Brits, I should have lingered a little more on that one slide, I'm sorry. But the Brits actually lost two cruisers and a bunch of other ships. And now why was that? There was a lot of back and forth. They started getting worried because of the German aerial attacks. They would drop aerial torpedoes. They would drop mines into the harbor. And several of the ships did hit these mines. And what happened is that by the end of a day, they would move those ships out because they knew the Germans always came at night in these raids. There were no aircraft carriers there. Not that I know of. Of course, I didn't read of any.
Where did our air power come from? Where did they fly out
of? The campaign, when they landed and went to Salerno, the Brits went up the eastern coast. There was a very large German air base at Foggia, Foggia, very big German air base. Of course, they had to abandon that. So we moved all of our planes, the Brits moved all of their planes into there, and they did fly from Sicily as well. Yes, sir.
Strikes me, they were in a relatively small area. There was no way that troops could be relieved to get out of the fighting areas. Is that correct? And
That's right.
so they
Everything.
were there for 6 months?
Yep, everything was in and out of there. But again, kudos to the Navy because they were constantly bringing in supplies, offloading supplies, loading casualties to take down to the hospitals at Puzzulia and Naples. But really, that was the only in and out that they had was from that beachhead. Now, remember what was supposed to happen. They were supposed to land, boom, 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 go take Rome. And they were, and what, again, in defense of Lucas, had he done exactly what they wanted him to do, and Kesselring couldn't believe that they didn't, those troops would have been slaughtered had they moved inland. Because there were, again, 2 divisions. Kesselring brought down 6 within a week. So they would have been destroyed.
Wasn't there a boatload of mustard gas that was sunk in the harbor?
That was Bari, B-A-R-I, over on the east coast of Italy. And actually, Richard Gollin, are you here? No, Richard Gollin's not here. He was going to do a program on that before COVID hit and we weren't doing any more programs. The harbor at Bari had these ships that were filled with mustard gas. The Luftwaffe hit that, and there was the stuff went everywhere. There were mass casualties. It's one of those underreported things. Yes, sir.
I was surprised by your comment about the balloon tank. The effort in Scotland and in Britain was to fool the Germans with a major division. Why would they take the risk of showing them that tank?
Oh, because from a distance, I mean, I guess it looked real enough, and if they threw camouflage brush shrubbery on it, it would look real enough. And if they put 10 in a particular area, the Germans would see it and say, oh, okay, we're not going to go over there, thinking that those were actual tanks. It's sort of like the thing during the Civil War. I think it was during the Peninsula Campaign, where General Huger kept marching these troops all in a circle around this one clearing to make Johnston think there were more troops than there were.
My concern is if indeed the Germans found out that they were using the balloon tank there, might they change their thinking about what was going on in Scotland?
I don't know. I think they were fooled in both areas because by that time, by 44, remember the mastery of the skies over Western Europe pretty much belonged to us. And if there were any spies in the area, they would see these tanks off in the distance again, but they would be pretty much fooled by them. Yes, sir.
there was an exhibit that went around the country, or at least part of the country, on the Ghost Army. And the blow-up tanks were used in France a lot during that period of time. They would set them up, they could move them around, and they were very concerned about maintaining a perimeter around them so that the local French people did not know what was going on.
Mhm.
So they were used extensively in France also.
Right. Yes, sir.
Two things. There was an Allied hospital ship that sunk.
Yes.
Was it mines? Is that what sunk at mines, or the Germans didn't have artillery that could reach?
I think, I know what you're talking about, and I'd have to look at it again, but I think it was hit by an aerial bomb.
My second thing is, I thought maybe you would mention the later famous actor that India did anything. Or would,
Say again?
I thought maybe you would mention the later famous US actor that was wounded at Anzio.
And who was that?
James Arness.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's why in Gunsmoke, he never rode a horse for very long, and walked for very long, because they bothered him the rest of his life.
Well, I learned something new today. Yes, sir.
What do you think the outcome would have been if, General Patton hadn't screwed up?
Well, you do know what his screw up was. He slapped a couple soldiers. I think even if that hadn't happened, they were gonna move him back anyway to England, just for the scare factor that everybody in the German high command, they were deathly afraid of him after North Africa, and Sicily especially. And they figured all along that he was gonna lead the cross-channel invasion, and where was he gonna land? At the Pas de Calais. That's where, and that's why, I think he would have been sent home there anyway, just a guess. Yes, sir.
Well, Patton was an armor guy,
Yes,
so if the tanks weren't good in Anzio because of the mud, you probably wouldn't have that much success either.
right, yeah.
I disagree. He would have figured something out.
I'm a little partial because my uncle was in the thing, so anyway.
I heard that the fact that there was no battle to defend Rome was also influenced by the opinion that it would destroy all the art and history of the town.
Yeah, I don't know what the logic or the what was behind that, but yeah,
The Italians certainly had, or the Pope always had an influence on that.
yeah,
And so it was finally decided that it was not, there was not going to
be
be
a battle,
battle in Rome.
yeah. What, yes, sir.
Can you comment briefly on the role of the Japanese American, I think it was 442nd Regiment? Were they involved with this?
They, to the best of my knowledge, they were not in Anzio. They were, however, on the Gustav line, facing Casino. Yes, sir.
I was just gonna say, it's kind of interesting how the Germans seem to have had a lot of technological innovations in spite of everything going on. Is that true overall in the whole theater, that they were kind of like a step ahead, technologically in many ways?
Yeah, but as I said, with that and with the Goliath demolition vehicle, they didn't meet with very, very good success. Again, this is the very beginning of a lot of this. So, and then as time went on with Europe, then you see the V1, you see the V2, and there's a whole host of literature about a lot of the other weapons and it was kind of scary what were on their blueprints, what they were planning. But the end of the war came too little, too late for them. All right, I want to see you back on February 23rd. Okay? Eden Sherman, not to be confused with a tank. Oh, yes,
Way for bringing us all back together. We would wish our fearless leader a very, very happy.
oh, stop. Thank
Happy
you,
birthday.
thank you, thank you.
I want you. That's great.
No, the good news about that is that, our admin assistant and her husband came over like 2 days later, because when the storm hit, it blew our front door off, and we had 5 feet of water in that house. She and her husband came over, they picked up all those shelves and they cleaned them, boxed them up, so whenever we get the shelving back down there, those shelves are gonna go back in. So they were safe.
Talks about that, but, you know, while they.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Like they did.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, they do. I was on the camera. You got 60 years out. Wait, home court, very deployed to be.
Oh, you did?
Two, and, like, that first time. Yeah, we landed in Pearl. One that all have together with, the one in high school class. I was with the name. Right. Yeah, boom, like, he was an all-American swimmer in Michigan, but he had a history of shoulder dislocation. He had Kentucky North Beach, right in his excuse. And so I stopped Michigan and, well, we, you know, so I've been in a long time. 12 years captured. So I've been in right on college, so. And he was February 69, and the Pueblos had just 68, so at least our ship. They started using World War II as a period. Way they were just my our mission in 1945, they started using for surveillance. And that's what we were initially, we had a sister ship, our port in Key West, and when the Russians were never come over on our side, you know, supplying people going to the Russians there, we just steamed back and forth, and followed them out like as long as kind of spy ship. Yeah, that's where we're initially, and then towards the end of the war, we were deployed. As a matter of fact, we went from the coast down to Vietnam, short bombardment, and then the ceasefire, and it would have been early 73. Well, maybe he'll do that sometime. No, same. All right, thank you. Thank you. See you next time. Okay.
We were in Toronto for 9 days.
Of course, we might go out there. No,
I could tell you
in the middle of March, you're in the sheet is called Columbus. Well, I know, removed graduate from, got called for a draft physical. And I enlisted, so I didn't want to be a secretary officer. And I got it, and I had been in, it was so jammed up with people you probably planned ahead. So I had an application for yes. I got accepted for OCS after I'd been in for 10 months already and had charged. It was near where it sounds like. And so I turned it down. Well, for one thing, I was stationed in Jackson in Mayport, and the ship wasn't deploying that much, and I decided not only and I took physics and biology at Jackson University, eventually chemistry. And then Navy paid for all that, was all on the station, and then And the greatest thing, was not, would not knocker. Yeah. Wellesley College wanted to strike against the so. We were still married, so, yeah, but our house, unfortunately, yeah, I'm retired now, yeah. So I did, the reason I asked about that was just right in front of this, and then, became a dermatologist, and I retired. Things ready. I had these car loads. Well, I was 75. I hit my car and wound up like work for 6 months. That was 3 years ago. So I kind of disability. Yeah, dermatology is so much fun. If people don't retire, they always say they just find them dead at their desk. You know.
That's my low tech corner before they had lasers.
Oh, it's boom since it. Women have taken over, and they're doing all this cosmetic stuff.
I said, when you went in, you know, did you think it was gonna be sexual, or I said, whatever. And he said.
Can you see all right back there?
Yeah. He's like, you know, he said, I say so.
That's a good word. I think it's underrated, but for me, it was, I was doing internal medicine and I